Hi, welcome. Thanks so much for contributing to these interviews and conversations. I want to first just give you the chance to introduce yourself before we launch into the questions.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. I am Shaheen, a queer Syrian refugee in the UK. I work at the London School of Architecture as a program manager. The London School of Architecture is a pioneering school where we combine academia and practice together, where our students basically spend 3 days in practice, and 2 days in studies, in full-time studies. The practice experience helped them build two big pieces of work. One is called the Critical Practice Manual, and the other is Critical Practice Theory, where they are able to critique the practice that they are working at while they are getting paid for it. Yeah.
That's amazing. Okay, well, the first question is wondering what was the aha moment when you realized you needed to do something and, how did you go about choosing what to do and how to do it?
Um, the aha moment, I think, when I saw that the way to shape spaces and the way to welcome everybody is the power of architecture. During my studies, I realized how much power architects have to either include or exclude people, or different or specific group of people. Of course, you can see in the industry there are a lot of deep-rooted problems. That includes um, uh, a lot of overtime hours, unpaid, the request or the expectation for people to pay their dues because the predecessors have done exactly the same, and it's a vicious circle where this doesn't end. The aha moment for me when I realized that I have lost a lot of members of the team over the years to staff turnover. The institution that I worked for did not have the capacity to retain its employees. And this is when we decided to step up. I decided that I couldn't just keep my head down, and we started talking to each other, with each other, organizing meetings with Section for Architectural Workers, which is a section within Unite the Union here in London. And that's how the journey started.
Thank you. So I feel like you sort of touched on this a little bit, but what do you see as one or two key problems that you continue to engage with, or you see other architectural workers facing today?
It's definitely the overtime, bullying and harassment into doing either overtime or the kind of very toxic expectations from the workplace that you need to do this in order for you to become an architect. This is just normal. And in the end, I'm sure it's everywhere in the world when basically they ask you to stay for a couple of hours here and there. They get pizza and beer for everybody, thinking that, yes, we are a family. Also, the staff turnover is one of the biggest issues where people feel they do not have a voice. They do not feel they are heard whenever they speak with as individuals, whenever they speak to the seniors in any institution. They do not feel that they are heard. Um, the moment that we decided to unionize and to request for recognition from our institution was when we realized the power that we have in the collective. It was one of the best decisions we decided to do in our lives, I would say, in our working lives at least. It did not only kind of give us the power to be heard, but it also made us a lot closer to each other as colleagues. We realized that we need to be together and for each other, to support and also to understand what the other is kind of going through, how we can be there for them. And luckily, with Section for Architectural Workers, we have amazing people that are in the industry and they know the exact struggles that we have. So the support from them is immense. And also, we have an amazing union representative that basically stood with us in every step of the way. And the most kind of amazing or point in that kind of process is that when I contacted the union to start this process of being recognized as a union, I realized that the elected officer is a graduate from the London School of Architecture, where basically they were taught how to critique their practices and how to stand up for their rights. Now it's a full circle and they are helping others to do exactly the same thing. And this was one of the proudest moments in this journey. And I think the best thing that I can share about this experience is that there will be lots of ups and downs, and it's going to be a very difficult journey to be heard. The system is built not to support the workers, but to support the institutions. With the help of unions, or at least for us, we were able to be heard. We were able to stand up on our grounds. We were able to deliver the message that we needed to deliver. And it brought us together as friends. We are not colleagues anymore. We are actually friends.
Wow, so beautiful and powerful. Thank you so much, George. Really
You're
appreciate it.
very welcome. Thank you for the opportunity.
You're welcome. So
Hi.
grateful to you for contributing to these interviews and conversations. I want to give you a chance to introduce yourself and then we'll get started on the questions.
Sure, yeah. I am Cameron McKay. I am branch secretary of Unite SOAR, which is, as a role, I guess, kind of the connecting tissue to the rest of Unite, which is one of the biggest unions in the UK, with just over 2 million members, I think. And so we're a branch of that. And we help organise architectural workers and fight for better conditions for them.
Wow. Okay, well, so question one is, what was your aha moment that got you involved in this work?
It was actually, I wrote an essay in university. So I can't tell, but so as George was saying, if someone's just listened to that to George, I wrote like an essay in the LSA about unionizing in architecture, basically. It's something I'd heard of for a while, but I wasn't, when it first came around, I wasn't employed and I was fresh out of uni. But I got my first like proper architectural job and I wrote this essay and I was like, I can't be saying all this nonsense without like putting money where my mouth is. And so yeah, it's just, I don't know, that was really the moment when, and it's actually the day after I submitted that essay, I joined. And yeah, it moved pretty fast from there. I got a good introduction call from the union, which we will be doing again soon. Everyone will be getting like nice intro calls. And then that's also what I started doing. So that's how I first helped out. And then I just got involved from there. I think I'd say, to people who want to join, we're always really excited to have people get involved. It's not that it shouldn't be that intimidating. Help out any way you can. And I decided I wanted to call new members and have a chat with them, and that's what I did. That was really my aha moment. I think I would just say, a lot of people have strong opinions about a lot of things, but I think an opinion is really like worthless without any kind of action behind it. And there's a lot of, I think there is quite like a broad like left sentiment, especially in architecture itself, that is actually just completely not backed up by any action whatsoever. People have this kind of delusion that they can, go about their career, and that in itself is some kind of like means of like activism, even if they're working in like a work practice or whatever. But none of it really addresses any of like the core issues that people will actually like address like academically or otherwise that they engage with. You actually have to meaningful work is done outside of your career. Everyone in this room has like something they do outside of SOAR. Because we all have to pay the bills. But the thing to realize is that paying the bills is not what's gonna, change the industry. It's not gonna, if you're really lucky, you might get like a good job that really does push those boundaries and like does it. But that is very much not the reality for 99% of architectural workers.
Yeah.
And if you are unsatisfied, you're not gonna critical practice your way out of the issues in architecture.
Yes. I love that. Critical practice your way out of the issues of architecture. That's perfect. So I think you also named a couple of these key problems, but what if you had to just boil it down to a couple of like key, like primary issues that you see architectural workers facing now, how would you describe them?
Yeah, I mean, number one is overtime. That is the one that really, in fact, no, I'm going to talk about, I think I'd say number one is pay, actually. I don't know what it's like in the US, assuming probably not that far away, but in the UK, architecture is like astoundingly badly paid, especially considering the like years of education that go into it and the astronomical debt. I'll drop my debt. I'm 125 grand in debt currently. So and that's many years of my pay, like 4 years of my pay. But yeah, I think pay is number one. It's like very low. I think architecture's had a non historically non-unionized labor force, and a lot more people study architecture than they used to, and there's been an inflow of like newly educated architects, and without an existing base of unionization to keep wages high and to leverage for that. So you just had this constant like squeeze and like race for the bottom.
Right.
A race to the bottom that's enabled by having no like organized labor to actually push back against the endless squeeze that architectural bosses will put on workers, because they're just an endlessly squeezable force because they're completely unorganized and also infatuated with this idea of a calling, and it being like a meaningful like sacrifice to endure these conditions. So yeah, pay number one, and then overtime is like really the big one. Which is kind of a double whammy. Like you get in a condition where I'm doing my part 3 currently, like my final qualification, and they were saying that there was they take like a survey of conditions of everyone doing the course, and there was one person who between their low pay and overtime is earning less than minimum wage.
Wow.
So it's a bad combination. But then I think, jumping off what George said, bullying is one that comes up a lot, which is a bit harder to pass. Like I don't really know what it is about architecture that really facilitates kind of nasty bosses in that way.
Yeah.
Like not that I'd blaze any bosses, but like particularly like vicious ones. I think there is a kind of weird power thing going on, and I think there's also probably a bit of like a cultural thing going on where a lot of architects are from a certain class, and there's a certain like attitude to like people in a position below you on the power structure that maybe enables it. I don't know, but those would be the three. I think bullying, pay, and overtime.
Yeah. So I'm going to jump to question 3 and maybe put you on the spot just a little bit. So, what do you think of the Venice Biennale and contributing in this way?
I say, yeah, I saw this question. I was like, I don't think much about the Venice Biennale. I don't. I always don't think enough about it to be astoundingly critical or to know that much to say. I think in my head it's kind of like an advertising expo. Like, and I think that's really its purpose. Like it's a kind of bit of marketing. Like I wouldn't look to it for any change. I'm sure it's a nice show. I'd like to go one day. It'd be a nice show.
Also, what would your marketing message be then if it is an advertising?
I think it would go back and be like, to the early thing. It's like your opinions don't mean anything unless you do anything about it. And
Yeah.
that entails doing, you know, what aligns with your opinions. What's actually, I think that's a big thing with like architecture is like there's like a theory of change stuff is like really missing, and it's like what can you actually do? You know, architects have so many like bold visions of the world, and it's like, you know, and which is something that's like hammered into you in education, you know, constantly having these like, you know, radical, they're saying that word, radical, like visions of the world, but then there's actually no engagement with what it means, like how do you achieve those, like and I'm gonna say like I don't think it's not even that new a thing. No, unions aren't new. Like this isn't like a new idea what we're doing here. We're applying it to a new, like, you know, I guess a service sector in a way that hasn't been done before in a post-industrial economy and like blah blah blah. But you know, it's kind of old hat in a good way. It's been proven. But that would be it. Just, you know, do something. Partnering around the Venice Biennale isn't going to change anything.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, then maybe just to wrap up, how and maybe this was part of the answer you just gave, but what's your vision then for the future of architecture?
Yeah, I did write down something for this one. I guess, and it was kind of like I was saying, I think architecture has enough like fantastical world visions in it. I think you know, instead of what do you want the world to look like, it's more of a question of how do you think the world should be made,
Mm.
and what that process should look like. You know, I think that's the question that is more pressing, because I think all these bold visions don't really mean anything without a kind of process behind them. And so it's maybe that's not so exciting for people, but it's more about the process of getting to any world you imagine, I think is actually what's important to you now. You know, we can imagine all the worlds we want, but if there's no like idea of how you get there, what's the point?
Yeah. Oh, that's a really clear call to action. Yeah, thank you so much. This has been really, really rich and inspiring. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you. That might need some editing. I blabbered a bit, but
All good. Hi, welcome. I want to just
Hi.
give you the floor to introduce yourself, and then we'll get into the questions.
Hi, I'm Tia. I'm currently the co-chair of Section of Architectural Worker, a branch of the Unite the Union. We are the only trade union in the UK for architectural workers.
So the question I have for you is, what advice do you have for people looking to get involved in organizing around the issues you're focused on?
I think start. That's my only advice. I think that there's a difference between activism and organizing, and often activism is self-selecting, and it's mostly people who have something that they want to do. And I think with organizing, it's just about the fact that you have to rally the people around you and convince them to do something. And my advice is to just begin to do something. And I completely agree with what Cam said. I think in architecture, what's really necessary at the moment is the sheer amount of people getting together and doing something together. And a lot of the work that we do, unfortunately, is volunteering, but I think that it's extremely important, and that we always need people to contribute to this, and the movement would be nothing without the people that are involved in it, and every single person matter, and every single contribution matter.
Thank you. So to just pose the question back to you, imagine the architectural worker who wants to start organizing. They don't know how. How would you guide them? Like, what is step one?
I would recommend them to join the union, as I always do, because the union is also not just a service organization, but the union is the union is you. And without that, the person contributing, there is not much that the union can do for them, because that is not how it works. I would just wrap up is that the union is not a service organization. It is only as strong as the work that the people contributed is part of. And I think in the UK there is and especially in architectural work, there is a lack of this power, and that, well, that we are there now, but I think that there is a lack of knowledge of what the union is. There's a lack of knowledge of how the organizing is. So I guess my message is to join the union, and then to join this community, and together we will work, and that we will organize. And that's kind of the main message.
Yeah, powerful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, welcome, Reishin. Thank you so much for taking the time to be interviewed and answer these questions for the Venice Biennale. Want to give you a chance to introduce yourself, and then we can dig in.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's so good to be in such nice company digitally. I'm Reishin. I'm one of the campaigns coordinators at SOAR Unite. So we look at a lot of the sort of public relations, propaganda, events, universities. We work on sort of the image and the sort of outward network that might feed organizing efforts, or might offer educational things about your rights and other things that have already been mentioned so far. So, yeah, is that enough?
Yeah, that seems great. Yeah. Okay, so this question has many parts. I'm going to go slowly. What do you think of the traditional institutions that represent or govern our profession, such as professional organizations, architecture schools, or the Venice Biennale?
Yeah, profound question. I think a lot of people feel disappointed. And I think that disappointment has become an apathy, which has perhaps been contrary to the language of the institution, which seeks to preserve itself, which seeks to posit a sort of influence, whether that's globally or domestically. And I think a lot of people are demanding that institutions are more responsive, or that they are reflecting crises or processes of having a voice in a more sort of urgent way. But I think there have been several examples over, I don't know, the past couple of years in various geographies that have sort of proven that institutions aren't necessarily equipped to deal with those questions. And I think, is that structural? Is that cultural? Is a very long question that probably requires a lot of more research and has sort of historical look. I think also the structural issue that I think some of my colleagues were referring to, this idea that the architect is this cultural navigator, is this person of power, is this person of influence, that the work that we do is not work but artistic, and therefore less worthy of attention or organizing. And I think that also feeds into these organizations, the sort of branding of the architect, the male connoisseur of sort of arbiter of beauty, I think is really loaded into those institutions. And I think also historically probably, come from a time in which the architect was an aristocratic gentleman who would live in somewhere much fancier than here. And sort of direct the layman to do tasks and say, well, I am the elite. And I think, and they were baked in a certain time of power dynamics with land, with resources. And I think today we don't live in the same ways, but perhaps we assume that we do in terms of the cultural baggage. So I think that needs really unpacking, deconstructing as well. But I think also, very simple things like, what are the democratic procedures that you engage with? What democracy is not something that we should take for granted, and that it is a technology that requires protecting. And so what does that mean, and what does that mean for each person? And not every side, not every model, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, and I think the Biennale, sorry, long-winded way to loop back to the Biennale, but I think the Biennale, again, is a similar sort of institution in the way that it sort of lives in this sort of World's Fair model that is sort of like, okay, well, here are the enlightened European nations coming to talk about something very fancy, and here are the sort of unique, quirky, different things that global South countries occupy. And then we're able to go and consume that information and feel good about ourselves, and what sort of Cam was saying earlier. And I think that fundamentally is problematic. And I think if we are not willing to actually deconstruct that and say, well, okay, what is our agency in such a position? It's not to say, I don't think any of us would say, let's abolish the whole thing and morally shame everyone who participates in the Biennale, because there are lots of workers who rely on the Biennale. There are lots of workers who work administration jobs in these places. They are architectural workers. But I think to really say, okay, we are here now and we would like better, you know, ethically, morally, practically. So then what are the mechanisms and tools to do that? And I think to put the union hat on is to say sort of organizing is that mechanism. And that's not just sort of, you know, coal miners wearing flat caps coming out with sickles and scythes and things like that, but, you know, can conversations like this, or sort of WhatsApp groups, or sort of, you know, the water cooler moment, they can all compound to influence these things. So I don't think it's hopeless, but I think it requires real serious introspection that the powers or the ruling class may not actually want to listen to.
Yeah. So just a follow-up question. I'm sort of picturing somebody wandering through the Venice Biennale, and they're tuning in and they're hearing you say, you know, we need to deconstruct these systems and structures. And in some ways, the Venice Biennale does not do that. It just reinforces them. So how might, you know, you encourage them to engage with the work that you're presenting, and even the sort of work, this World's Fair, you know, experience that they're immersed in at the Biennale?
Gosh, big question.
I can imagine. You don't have to answer. We can end in your eloquent and thoughtful response to that.
No, I think it's a good question. I'm just picturing, like, as you said, somebody sort of perusing through, putting headphones on and being like, listening to you ask that question, being like, oh, how are they going to answer this? That's how I feel. What can be done? I mean, I think if you're already at the Venice Biennale, you're probably of a certain socioeconomic and cultural class in the first place. And I think that offers you a certain level of privilege, that offers you a certain level of position, whether you're an individual or you're a curator, or I don't know, a student, or someone who works in a, I don't know, a star architecture company, you know. And I think there's something to be said about, you know, architectural training, or those that are interested in these concerns, that you both have means, you are educated, and you are in a global north country in which many of these issues are playing out in real time. And certainly I think Italy has a history of working class rights struggles that I think probably more, I don't know, lay people sounds like the wrong term, but I think normal people who live outside of these sorts of cultural environments probably do have a sense of those conditions, whether that's their grandfather or uncle or auntie or whatnot. And I think to live perhaps outside of the Venice Biennale bubble where possible, and to say, okay, well, I'm not Giorgio from you know, the Adriatic Sea who makes olive oil, but you know, how can I engage a little bit more meaningfully with the fact that I'm here and I have you know, spent carbon to come here. So I think to think critically about that it isn't just consumptive, and that there is agency, and there is a training to say, okay, I have this training, you know, I am well educated, and I can't save the world alone, but there are things that I can do. And I think equally, you know, the Venice Biennale is all about parties, and people listen to generally people listen to what people say at parties. So I think to also use the network of gossip and the network of sort of self-promotional schmoozing to sort of, you know, slide some of these questions in. Well, well, were you paid for your overtime? Oh, no way, you know. Will you come back in 4 years, you know? Yeah.
Incredible.
Maybe that's helpful.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you so much, Reishin. Such thoughtful responses and yeah, just brilliant insights. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I mean, what a pleasure to work with you. And
yeah, it's so fun. It's so fun to have these conversations, you know, and realize that we are in this global community, you know, even though our individual efforts are kind of our collective efforts more locally based. You know, we're all still connected in a really large network, and that's super inspiring.